Here we go again. We know y'all be listening. The OG back and better than it's ever been. Blast from the past, you know that our pace is fast. And if you want to sub, we got something for you to smash. 5 stars with them positive vibes. Don't miss a beat week to week, you just gotta subscribe. Even if your team's got you hella mad, don't worry, we write our prescriptions on a yellow pad. So settle in, y'all, this is gonna be fun. Cause when it comes to hot takes, 2 is better than 1. From beer to the Canes to the ACC, who knows more about this than us, the OG?
Let's podcast alongside Joe Giglio. I'm Joe Ovias. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Let's get through number 4, number 3, number 2, and number 1 for our end of year OG review. You did a wonderful job in part 1 with your countdown, Joe. So I'm curious what you have cooked up for number 4.
Number 4.
Yeah, that's it?
I mean, we got to get there.
That's it?
I got better ones coming.
You know what, though? Appropriate. That's a very Dave Doeren-esque number 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, number 4. Shit. Be happy I even said 4.
Shit. Be happy we got to number 4.
Right?
And they didn't get to loss number 4, by the way. So it's totally appropriate.
This was the year where I proclaimed Dave Doeren entered the Herb Sendek zone. And this was after the Virginia win, which has given us so much joy this year with his quote, "Shit, be happy we won." And props to Ethan Hyman, who had a wonderful video of this entire sequence.
I mean, there's always questions and concerns, you know what I mean? Like, what we did tonight, I thought was a bunch of guys had to play. There was injuries. In the second play of the game, Boykin goes down, you know. And all week in practice, Cecil Powell was our backup strong safety. Cecil went in the game, got hurt. So both strong safeties were hurt in the first quarter. And so Bishop Fitzgerald moves from free safety to strong safety. Didn't take a rep in practice all week at that position. That's what we were dealing with, you know what I mean? Like, those are the things going on you guys don't understand. And so I thought we played really well under the circumstance with what we had. Devon Betty wasn't at practice all week because him and his fiance had a baby, you know? So he missed all the practices this week. So beautiful baby girl, you know? But that's going on. There's real life stuff happening on this team, you know? On offense, you know, we lost a running back on the second to last day of the week. You know, and then we get out there and all of a sudden Raphael gets hurt. You know, those things are real. And people want to bitch at play calling and this, that, and the other. Like, there's other stuff going on, man. We found a way to win on the road in the rain against an inspired football team. Shit, be happy we won. It's a good win. I'm excited to go home 3-1, get ready to play Louisville.
That quote and the reaction to that quote was why I felt like, man, like the people who ride for Dave are going to ride for Dave. The people who don't like Dave are going to find everything to not like about Dave, including being mad after a win, which was his ultimate pushback to that. Like, what do you guys want? We won the game. It doesn't matter how we won the game. We won the damn game.
Yeah, there was like a penalty miracle involved there. And
doesn't matter. You won the game. That's right. The point. And it kind of really set the tone for the rest of the year, which actually ended up being a pretty damn good year for NC State.
That was a little bit more of a roller coaster than that, though.
It was. But, man, just be happy. We beat Carolina at the end and go into a decent bowl game.
It was a very eventful year in year 11 for Dave Doeren. And when we saw him at the kickoff and he was like giving us props, he's like, yeah, you guys, you know, you figured out how to stick around. You figured out how to kind of deal with adversity. You just keep grinding. You just stick around, man. You outlast them, right? And they come into this season, and I think we all thought it would be one of those reset type years. It was just a matter of what would the floor be. And I was worried, even after the UConn game, I was like, oof, man, you should be blowing the doors off of you. Even on the road, it shouldn't have been that close the way that they played. They come home, they have the rain, there's like a lightning delay, and then Sam Hartman looks like Joe Montana reincarnated in the old Sammy football from his Wake Forest, Winston-Salem days. They lose to Notre Dame. Who cares about VMI? They go play Virginia on the road in a Friday night game. That, remember, at the time, Virginia was in a state of disarray. Hadn't beaten a 1A team in 2 years, and we're still kind of reeling. And everyone was like, "Oh, boy, you needed a miracle kind of BS penalty on Virginia's quarterback to win that, to even get in position to kick a field goal to win that game." And that's where you saw, and quite frankly, the offense was stalling under Robert and Brennan Armstrong. The next week, they play a Friday night game again at home against Louisville, Joe. And I was there. I was in the stands for that one. And I was like, man, this is like a Friday night. This should be the juices should be flowing all the time. And in the first quarter of that game, I think
my juices flow all the time.
The student section was actually chanting for MJ Morris. This is even before Brendan Armstrong threw any of his interceptions. There was even, there was a lot of grumbling going on in that game. And they end up losing because of the turnovers. And their offensive line was just a total and complete mess in that football game. But they lose 13-10, and it ends up costing them a chance to play for the ACC championship game.
That's the law of the wolf.
Because after that game, they had decided to go to MJ Morris. Brendan Armstrong, you'll remember, graduate transfer. They got him from Virginia. Robert and the offensive coordinator, his first year, felt more comfortable with Brendan, thought they could make more hay in this rebuilding, resetting year with their comfortable, a quarterback they were comfortable with, an older 60-year guy. And, those first 5 games were an adventure on offense. There was a steep learning curve. Defensively, they were out of position a lot. Peyton Wilson, while tremendous with his effort, was trying to do too much, trying to make every play. Aiden White, a guy who was an All-American the previous year, was quickly moving into the David Amerson zone, where you're wondering, what is he exactly doing right now on some of these plays against Notre Dame in particular, where you're coverage busts at the end of the half, really just like, what is going on? And then, they bring MJ in, they win the Marshall game in a pivotal game, Joe. Let's not overlook that Marshall game, because they were losing in that game. Marshall is a talented team.
Yeah, you tried to tell people about the
talented team who had won at Notre Dame the year before. They had 0 Fs given in that game, Marshall. They came in here, they're about to win that football game. And I had Akron Chuck Amato vibes. Like I had, oh boy, this is it for Dave in year 11. And they pull that thing out of the fire. They win the football game. They go to Duke the next week. And that's where the reset comes.
They got mushed.
I loved the messaging from Dave after that game.
Well, you should have heard what I said about myself and my own team after we lost to Duke in that locker room.
The penalties were too much. The turnovers were too much. The busts on defense were too much. And it was just like, hey, can we just play the way that we know, the proven formula that works for us? Don't give up the big plays. Don't kill ourselves with procedural penalties. Let's run the football a little bit, give ourselves a chance, and let's figure out who our best players are. From that point on, they're 4-3. They bottom out. They have a week off. That's really when you see Anai go, aha, Kevin Concepcion is our best player on offense. Aha!
It took a while to get there, but yeah.
Let us find different ways to get him involved. Let us find different ways to use him. Defensively, hey, Peyton, your effort is unbelievable, but I need you to do Peyton's job, not the other 10 guys. There was big 8th grade gym class energy for Peyton Wilson at the beginning of the year, showing off for the girls. Like, oh, I'm going to hit every ball of the volleyball class. Like, whoa, dude, let the other people do their job.
Yeah. And
then you saw the defense come along. You saw a Davin Van. You saw a Jalen Scott. You saw the different players, Robert Kennedy, emerge and make and look like that Tony Gibson defense that we're used to seeing for NC State. And all of the parts, all of the things that had to happen for them. Clemson coming here. They beat Clemson. Knock Will Shipley out of that game. Make sure the Wolf Blood doesn't get one last laugh at them. Peyton has the pick 6. Cade Klubnik and Dabo look like they were NC State with all of their penalties and all of their turnovers and all their mistakes. Miami comes the next week. They're dropping interceptions. I mean, like Miami was like, here, you win the game. We don't like success. We don't want to be the you anymore. I mean, don't think about it. Dave's there in 11 years. He now has 2 total wins over Clemson, and now he has 1 win over Miami. So those were huge games. And instead of us sitting here going, wow, man, huge games. Wolfpack looks great. What happens? MJ Morris and his family is like, hey, cool. Checks notes, checks calendar. Yeah, we're not playing football the rest of the year.
Yeah.
We're going to need to save our eligibility. We're going to need to save MJ's eligibility so that he gets a 3rd year of NIL money. Oh, but no,
we're not going anywhere.
We
want to be with NC State.
What are you talking about? We just don't want to play against Wake Forest and Carolina.
And as much as I will point out where Dave Doeren gets a lot of messaging wrong, the way they handled the MJ Morris situation was perfection.
It was well done. They let the family kind of
choke
on it.
This is one of those things where I try to tell this to my kids. You and I kind of we handle it this way sometimes as well. Let them talk. Let them set basically give them the platform to say enough things that they end up tripping over, while you do not give people things that they could old takes expose you for or double back on. And it was interesting, and you knew from the jump that's how they were going to play it, was because the day that all happened, NC State had their coaches show. And Dave Doeren did not talk about it at all on the coaches show. And then he had media availability, and he was just like, yeah, it's something that kind of factored in. We knew it was kind of a possibility, but it is what it is. That's their decision. We got to keep going. And then you started to get some of the quotes from the players and how Brennan Armstrong handled getting booed, getting benched.
Booed.
The quote was, he's a grown-ass man.
That was Aiden White. Yep, he's a grown-ass man. He can do this.
So you combine that, Peyton Wilson's leadership throughout the entire season, the way that these Dave Doeren teams, say what you want about them, they don't win pretty, but they do take on a personality that is chip on the shoulder. I mean, look, this is a man who fought with Steve Smith out of thin air. Okay?
Tell Steve Smith in the studio, this ain't a basketball school. He can kiss my ass.
One of the more bizarre turns of the season.
After the Clemson win.
Yeah. Yes.
And you and I talked about it then as, no, I don't think his beef is with Steve Smith. He's simply using Steve Smith as an avatar for the fans who've been bitching all season long about how they've gotten to this point. But then we fast forward to the end. And Carolina is coming into this game.
Oh, well, that's the other part of this that we can't overlook, right?
Yeah.
While State is struggling through those first 6 and 7 games,
UNC 6-0.
Carolina is on a path to the playoff.
Duke has game day.
Duke's got game day.
Yes.
They're packing Clemson shit in the opener, and you're going, State, why can't you beat Clemson?
This is why I said he was in the Herb zone.
Yes.
Because as much as Herb Sendek could point to NCAA tournament success, and I've got blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but buddy, look what Carolina and Duke are doing. And then with football, it's doubled down even worse, because at least with Carolina State, there's a pedigree there. Carolina, you're Spider-Man meme. And then Duke, come on now.
Yeah, Elko kind of catching lightning in a bottle there. And then the way that it turns out, Duke loses their coach, loses their quarterback, and the season kind of crumbles around them because water finds its level.
It does.
And
Duke had, like we said in the part 1 of this year in review, Duke had their moment in football again.
They did.
And I'm curious when Duke's going to have a moment in football in the near future. We saw it under Cutcliffe. Took 10 years to see it again. So
could be a minute. And then Carolina, the way that Carolina's season fell apart, while that's happening, State is just on a rocket ship. Clemson, Miami, Wake Forest, really entertaining game in Blacksburg against Virginia Tech in a game they easily could have lost. And that sets us up for the night game against the Tar Heels over at Carter Finley Stadium on the Saturday after Thanksgiving, where, quite frankly, you and I are still trying to process how did Carolina not think there was a football game? Like, it was almost like they pulled the reverse Bizdelic Jordan on them. Like, I don't know. We will show you no respect by showing you no respect.
I have said for the longest time that North Carolina has a getting up for it problem.
Is this Hunter?
Yes, it's Hunter.
Oh shit, Hunter! Rep, man.
He said he was showing up.
Were you surprised?
Absolutely, I was shocked.
Yeah, first quarter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, dumbfounded.
If we all recognize it, why don't they seem to recognize it?
Fucking planted a flag on our field last year.
Right.
Why are we not woke the fuck up?
Hunter, let me ask you a question.
All right.
Is Drake a dog?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Stop it. Stop it.
All right,
You guys were booing Brennan Armstrong 3 weeks ago. Please shut the fuck up. Please shut the fuck up. God.
If Luke May was a dog who lived to piss on state, by the way,
Absolutely.
then Drake
Can't play defense.
a
Just like
dog.
Sam Howell couldn't play defense.
Yeah,
You got to give Hunter a hug. You're watching on YouTube. Joe's giving Hunter a dap and a hug because
Every game.
Hunter is the Carolina football fan that tries to rep. And if there's a
But
pill,
how? But how for that game? How?
with the hospital being right there's got to be doctors somewhere doing research that can give them a pill that would get them up for these types of games, because I think it goes beyond just NC State, North Carolina. We've seen this when they've gotten it handed to them by ECU.
Sure.
Well, we weren't really thinking about ECU, whatever. There's a level of we're above it when it comes to football that North Carolina has never earned. When they do decide they want to take these games seriously, we've seen this with Miami, right? There's some weird thing that triggers
For the Heels.
the Tar Heels when they see the Hurricanes. I don't know if it's a leftover from the early days of expansion or whatever it is, but they do it for the Tar Heels. They seem to have these incredible games against Duke for whatever reason.
And win.
And
Close.
win close games. And the victory bell. Is that what it is? Does UNC need a trophy? Like, do we actually need to get the trophy off the ground finally for State and Carolina?
So State now, this is year 11 for Dave.
Yeah.
And you and I'm always kind of partial to 20 as his best work.
This was his best work.
Because of the previous year and the pandemic and
This
all
was.
of the things that were going on that year. I don't think there's any question at this point that going 9-3 with this group,
Yeah.
a very limited group on offense, having the MJ Mara situation, pulling Brennan Armstrong back off of the fire the way that they did, as you mentioned, handling the messaging with MJ Mara the way that they did, closing the season with the 5 straight wins, not just 5 straight wins, but again, a Clemson team you never beat, a Miami team he had literally never beaten, going to Winston-Salem, winning there for only the second time since 2001, and then closing with your 3rd straight win over Carolina. And they finally have it right in their game notes. Since 2020, NC State now is 23-11 in the ACC. That's second best to only Clemson, 23-11. In all games, they're 34-15, also second best to only Clemson. So again, the part that's missing for Dave is and what we'll see now, because today is signing day, that when we're recording this on signing day, they're going to be happy with all of the additions they're making in the portal. Grayson McCall is one of the best quarterbacks in the portal. Jordan Waters is the kind of running back that they probably could have used this year, but heck, he'll help them next year. Wesley Grimes, a kid from Wake Forest, receiver from Wake Forest, local kid. Jonathan Paylor, some of the other local players that they've signed in this class. All of those signs and stars and everything else are lining up for the Wolfpack and their garbage schedule next year.
Yeah, but Joe, you know better than that.
And then now they go play K-State with no quarterback, no play caller, with a chance to win 10 games for only the second time in 113 years of NC State football.
You have a podcast called Law of the Wolf. You're setting yourself up for 2024, right?
I'm just saying.
This is what you're doing. No. This is what you're setting. This is what you're setting up.
Boys.
This is what you're setting up. This is what's going to happen after NC State fans have been going, man, your 2 NFL quarterbacks, Sam Howell and Drake May, you know what their last recorded losses were? They were to us. We beware, blah. So I don't even know who UNC's quarterback is going to be next year. Whoever it is.
Max Johnson. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It could be a situation where they find themselves with a 3rd string quarterback. I don't know. You know what's going to happen. It's going to be the reverse, because that is the law of the wolf, Joe.
Number 3. I mean, that's a triple play.
The Carolina Panthers. We have gone through just about every emotion we can possibly think of when it comes to the Carolina Panthers. But I think I've isolated the one thought about the Carolina Panthers going all the way back to when they made the move to get the number 1 pick. It's the sentiment of, are you sure? Are you sure? And you and I remember it vividly. We were at the ACC tournament in March in Greensboro. And in the middle of us talking about basketball, the alert hit. The Carolina Panthers have traded up to the number 1 spot with the Chicago Bears. They've given up XYZ, DJ Moore. And you and I were like, whoa, okay, that's substantial. And we wondered, is there a quarterback in this draft that you feel is worth this draft capital to go and get? But there was one thing that came out. There was one thing in thinking back on this entire year with the Carolina Panthers that has permeated throughout the entire calendar year and really the entire time since he's been there. It all came back to David Tepper. It was the reports coming out saying they now control the draft. After being embarrassed by Matt Rule and nobody talking about them, guess who was the belle of the ball leading up to draft day? The Carolina Panthers. What were they going to do? Who were they working out? They had what? A contingent of 50 people that were showing up to these various pro days.
Probably should have been the first sign.
So that's ultimately what it was all about. David Tepper, right down to his press conferences and just how bad this organization has been looked at because of his ownership.
Yeah, he buys the team after the 2017 season, before the 2018 season, he buys the team.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, the Panthers are 31-65, which is the second worst record in the NFL. To the New York Jets, 29-67. They haven't made the playoffs since 17. You mentioned the Matt Rule debacle.
Yeah.
Now, I want to be consistent. They should have fired Matt Rule. They needed a cleanse after Matt Rule. Steve Wilks certainly made a case at 6-6, but it was clear from the jump that he was not going to give Wilks a chance to have the job on a permanent basis.
No, he wasn't.
That was likely a mistake. Likely. Now, he had a choice. Do you go old and safe? 62-year-old Frank Reich, who had himself been fired midseason by the Colts? Or do you go young and take maybe a risk in the draft too? You go Shane Steichen, the Eagles play caller, and go take Anthony Richardson from Florida, a true scratch-off wild card. You could have done both. It's interesting that Richardson flashed in a way that even before the concussion and other injuries, he flashed in a way that Bryce Young simply has not. And spoiler, will never in his career because he's not that type of player.
Well, I wanted to go back to that because I was going through our clips and back on August 30th, when the pick had been made,
8:30, okay,
and we started talking about training camps. And look, there's even a clip where we did the fun thing where camp opens up and we're getting the breathless coverage of this one guy made an incredible interception.
Hey, at least they made him the starter from the jump. We didn't get any of that nonsense.
Just quick to your point on that, not to belabor it, but yeah, going old and safe did make sense, and they had put a lot of
I
trust.
I could understand the choice.
They put a lot of football people around, and it made sense. And I even, to be consistent back in the summer, I was like, it's refreshing to have adults in the room that aren't goofing around with how they're going to go about Bryce Young. Yes, we brought in Andy Dalton, but Andy Dalton's not going to be QB1.
Right?
They're not going to do the thing that the Bears did,
or even our boy Urban Meyer down in Jacksonville.
Sure.
Gardner Minshew. I mean,
it's all a competition. Stop it. He's your guy. So they never messed around with it. But then we started to see some worry in the preseason. Things felt like they were either hiding the playbook, ramping them up too slowly. Sure. It just was off from the jump. We're like, this offense doesn't look like it in any way, shape, or form is dynamic. And that's why back on August 30th, you had said we're making these comparables with Bryce Young that don't make any sense.
I have bristled every step of the way at people who want to compare Bryce Young to Russell Wilson because it's just flat wrong.
It's wrong.
Except this one instance. If the quarterback is the manager, if the quarterback is the helper, is the guy who extends drives, doesn't make mistakes. That's what Russ did his first year. They ran the football. They played defense, Seattle. I think if the Panthers can get Sanders going and the defense going, then all of a sudden you're not asking Bryce to win games. You're saying, hey, I do need you to make some plays. I do need you to extend some drives, but I'm not asking you to win games.
No, that's not.
And remember, that was a formula Seattle used to win the Super Bowl.
But a totally different guy.
But it is totally different skill set. But I look at this as a great opportunity. What has happened in this preseason, in my opinion, actually helps the Panthers instead of going 3-0. And again, everybody being on their popsicle, everyone's like, oh, psh.
And even when we saw a little bit of what they had, I mean, this clip of you just absolutely singing the praises of Hayden Hurst unfortunately for Hayden Hurst. No, look, in all seriousness, Hayden Hurst is going through it. He has like this post-concussion traumatic
it's
thing.
Football. It happens.
It happens, and it's tough. It's tough to see, but we were talking up the pieces that they had put together that would make sense for Bryce Young. Of course, that didn't necessarily work out.
I love what they've done with him. I think he's going to be very steady, and I think they're going to use him in a way this year in particular with the pieces that they've put around him. I can't say enough good things about Hayden Hurst. If you're in my fantasy league right now, understand I'm taking Hayden Hurst. They're asking Bryce Young to be the face of the franchise. They're not asking him to be the savior of the franchise. They're not putting him out there like they did Cam Newton and saying, oh my God, you're this amazing physical freak. I need you to just go make plays any way that you possibly can to make us relevant and interesting. They're putting him into a very calculated position where they are now in a situation where they could make the playoffs this year.
So this gets us into the season. And while we don't know what Bryce Young is, we don't, because the way that Frank Reich and this offense had been run was so vanilla. And the pieces that they put around him did not pay off in any way, shape, or form, that I cannot sit here in good faith, have a conversation with you about Bryce Young without saying, I don't know. I know that's what we want to do. I know this entire season has been about, I was right about Bryce Young, he's a bust, or he's going to be okay. I think it's perfectly acceptable in year one, given the circumstances and given how bad of a fit Frank Reich ended up being for the Carolina Panthers, not just for Bryce Young's development, but just in terms of what kind of organization David Tepper wants to run. We do not know the answer to it.
Yeah, the meddling part, I think, was the biggest part of the Reich firing midseason, which I could make the argument didn't need to happen. And, you know, our conversations with Darren Gant and Mike Kay and Julian Council, it was like, yeah, like, you know, when Matt Rule was gone, it was like relief.
Yes.
Like, oh, thank God they got rid of that idiot. You know, with Frank, it was more like, man, he's like really nice and respectful, and
people didn't respect him
because they knew, you know, the hand behind the puppet there was Tepper. So
and you could see that you and I made a little bit of we kind of made it a thing in that we would go back through Frank Reich press conferences.
Yeah,
it was almost like, remember the old Fired Joe Morgan website where they would go through somebody's column and then just pick apart like how awful this column was. You and I were doing that with these Frank Reich press conferences where he was saying things that just did not make sense.
He sold out David Tepper early. Well, when I go meet with Mr. Tepper on Tuesdays, and I'm sitting here thinking, is this guy like trying to like call plays and what? One quick point though about Bryce Young that I think is fair to make. You're saying we don't know what he could be.
Yeah.
I think we know what he's not.
Sure.
And that is the problem for the Panthers. When you pick 1-1, particularly this franchise, and I think it fits in with the theme of the week, the only thing you know is Cam Newton. You know what I mean? Like, Cam Newton is a superhuman.
Well, I jotted that down.
6'5", 240, just a freak, a total and complete freak.
Yeah.
And who won games by himself and dragged carcasses of, you know, Philly Brown and the white, you know, Burson, you know,
Brenton Burson,
whatever the hell his name was. Like
Lauren Brownlow's favorite player of all time.
That's what your mind is if you're a Panthers fan of what 1-1 looks like. And Bryce Young, if he was the 8th pick, you have where's where they were. You go, oh, okay,
yeah,
I can see him. He can be a Tua. He can be a this. If we put all this, we help him with this, we do that, he'll be fine. When you're 1-1, you're expected to be something else. And I think it's fair to say he's not an elite athlete. And I don't think he's capable of winning games on his own, which is the standard we had seen from that pick at that position with that franchise. And that was clear to me after Bryce Young's performance against Georgia in the playoffs 2 years ago. Clear to me. So why it wasn't clear to them, they fell for this BS test, the S2 test or whatever the hell it was.
Yeah.
And we come to find out, again, in my magic piecing together of listening to the announcers, do you know who like also crushed it on the S2 test? I think I'm calling it the right name.
I think so, yeah.
Brock Purdy. And it was like, we found this diamond in the rough with the last pick of the entire NFL draft because he'd scored really well on this test. You can't apply the same logic to the very first pick of the draft. That is so backwards.
It got so bad for the people who run that test that they've actually done interviews. I think there was an interview that Pablo Torre had done on his podcast where they're like, let's talk about what this test is about. Because it's like, man, you're making it bad for my business, man. Because that's the last thing you want. It's like, oh, so everybody's raving about this S2 cognitive test, and you had this one franchise that clearly was in on it.
Right.
And how's that panning out, right?
Right.
But I do think that you brought up Cam Newton, which makes this really a year of a Panther in a way that we could not have expected. It's funny, as much as they've tried to move on from Cam Newton, they cannot move on from Cam Newton. There was the end of the Matt Rule era, and they had to bring him back to give the fuzzy feelings. It worked for one game and one game only.
I had to coach the coach.
And now
I need that clip, by the way.
Now you got Cam Newton in the media realm explaining differences between game changers and game managers, and he's bringing up quarterbacks that are probably comparable to Bryce Young at this point. You have to put stuff around him, which gets back to the central point of the Panthers and what this year has been about. David Tepper. Going forward, he seems to have at least understood certain lessons, right? Like, okay, I went and got the hot shot, didn't work out. Let me go in the opposite direction and get something old and safe that football people like. Okay, well, that didn't work out either. All right, well, the pieces aren't fitting. It's not a cohesive unit. Clearly, there was, as Joe Person and Diana Rossini reported in The Athletic, a Hunger Games-like atmosphere, which to me spoke more of the lack of respect people had for Frank Reich in the building than it was about running to David Tepper. Because you could pick apart all sorts of organizations. The Houston Texans, by the way, are not that far removed from their own level of palace intrigue with former Patriot guys and who was talking to who and what coach are they getting. And now the Texans are the belle of the ball because they seem to have gotten the right draft pick. They seem to have gotten the right coach in D'Amico Ryans. So you can turn this around quickly and get past all the stuff that people were convinced were the reason why nobody would ever want to work for you. Because remember, the Texans were viewed as one of those jobs. Well, who would want this job? Well, they seem to have gotten it right, at least in year one. So going forward for 2024, the curiosity is going to be, what lesson did David Tepper learn this time? And is he going to bring in a coach that wants to have the sole control of everything? Jason LaCanfora recently wrote a piece in the Washington Post about Jim Harbaugh and Bill Belichick. In that story, he was convinced on the executives that he talked to that Bill Belichick might go off and be a defense, like a coordinator or a VP of football operations. He actually will not be a head coach in the NFL next year. It would be hilarious if he goes to Alabama as some sort of quality control coach for Nick Saban. That'd be hilarious.
Can Matt Canada be the offensive coordinator?
Why not? Okay. Why not? Which then gets us to Jim Harbaugh. And the reason why Harbaugh might not fit for the Chargers, because people are like, oh man, well, they've got Justin Herbert. Why wouldn't you want that job? Well, Harbaugh wants control.
Right.
And the Chargers are not in that position right now in how they operate. But you know who might be so desperate to win that they'd be willing to lessons learned. Fine, Jim, you do your thing. I know you're going to burn out fast. I probably got 4 years with you, but I can turn this thing around because that's what the NFL is built for. You can quickly turn these things around through free agency because we all know the salary cap, like birds, is not real. But will he do it? Can he convince somebody like Harbaugh to come over and take that job?
All right, I have a scenario for you.
Okay.
I believe here's the Panthers' way home.
Okay.
This all started because they got fleeced by the Bears.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If we go back to the draft with J.C. Horn at number 8, if the Panthers that year had done the right thing and taken Justin Fields, we're in an entirely different universe, I believe. I think the Bears are going to use the number 1 pick on a quarterback, and I think they're either going to cut Justin Fields or trade him for a bag of donuts. I think the Panthers should go get Justin Fields. Complete the universe. Go back and like what are they called? The timeline? What's the timeline?
What did they put?
The gemstones?
They put some of that strawberry puree or beet juice.
What are those gemstones?
In that coffee?
They're not gemstones. What are they? The Mind Stones?
The Mind Stones.
Move on. Go back.
All right. You've lost it. I think there's something in
No,
your
that's
coffee.
the only way to do it. The shortstop. Number 2. Derek Jeter. Number 2.
you and I have workshopped a lot of ideas for podcasts in a previous life. And there was one project that we had kicked around about the last year of the ACC, right?
Mhm.
But I think we can come up with a sequel to the last year of the ACC. So to set this up, what was the original idea of the last year of the ACC as we knew it, or at least in a micro sense, ACC basketball?
Yeah. I feel like 2019, we still had Kay, we still had Roy,
Mm-hmm.
we had Zion, we had Kobe White, and it felt like the old days.
Mm-hmm.
And I always said was that was really the end. I mean, you had the freaking former president of the United States showing up over at Cameron Indoor Stadium for a regular season game.
But it was an end in a figurative sense, in that when we look at the permutations of ACC conference life, you have your expansion or whatever. To your point, it felt like the old days. Basketball was still the thing. Like basketball was the center.
Yeah, and you had those giants of coaches.
Mm-hmm.
Like who's the best? Again, we talk about this a lot. Who's the best coach in the ACC right now?
I don't know.
Basketball?
I don't
Jim
know.
Larinaga?
Maybe
Tony Bennett?
your guy Mike Young.
I love Mike Young, but he doesn't have the bona fides of Mike Krzyzewski or Roy Williams or Dean Smith.
He won that ACC championship, I guess. But anyway, so I was in agreement with you in that that's a fascinating point when we go 30 years from now and somebody wants to do like they did for the history of the ACC tournament or the history of the Dixie Classic and all that stuff. You and I can make the argument, yeah, man, 2019 is the last, like you're not going to realize how good you had it.
Yeah.
Until it's too far away.
You knew who the players were. You were interested in those players.
But now we actually have a year in which we can point to and say, that's when the ACC literally died. Not figuratively, literally died. And that would be 2023 and the summer of our great discontent in the footprint. And it's not something that started in the summer of 2023. It just kind of came to a head. It's not like we haven't been talking about conference realignment for years as the SEC has done what they've decided to do, or the Big Ten has decided to do what they want to do, or the Big 12 being aggressive in how they've aligned themselves in the aftermath of these big chess pieces being moved. It was the transition over to Jim Phillips and this, for lack of a better analogy, the Star Wars Jedi, your devotion to that hokey religion is just not feeling it. And whereas in Star Wars, the Force comes through and saves your ass, the Force is not going to come through and save the ACC. And every step along the way, the ACC has been reactive rather than being proactive. And now they find themselves outside of the college football playoff because there's no respect for ACC football. None whatsoever. A team can go undefeated. If that were Alabama in the same situation, they're in. If that were Georgia in the same situation, they're in. If that was Ohio State in the same situation, or Michigan, a team that has no offense, the quarterback. I'm sorry, I'm watching Michigan just run the damn ball and win with their defense. What's the difference to me? But the ACC lacks that respect. And it's only going to continue because they have a broadcast partner that doesn't respect them either. And they have a commissioner in the ACC that seems overwhelmed with all the changes that are going on right now. And rather than being proactive, they've been reactive and just, we got to do this. We got to do this. We got to do that. And now we're here with the ACC.
So let's look at the end result. The ACC ends up adding Stanford, Cal, and SMU.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Stanford and Cal come at a reduced rate.
Which, by the way, SMU has been desperate to get into a conference for years. This is not a new phenomenon. I'm old enough to remember going to a Duke SMU football game where they handed out a flyer. I'm not making this up. I forgot what year it was, but they were handing out a flyer, and it was a one sheet telling you all the ways in which SMU was back in business, baby. We are no longer the Pony Express. We've got this new stadium. We got boosters on board. We got oil money. And nobody wanted them. And in this last round of conference realignment, nobody wanted them. And they literally bought their way into the ACC.
To your point about being reactive. Okay. They end up adding Stanford and Cal at a reduced rate because of the Pac-12, the way that it fell apart.
Yeah.
They end up adding SMU at no cost to the ACC. Those three additions gave them a prorated amount from ESPN for the three additions. If you want to talk about why ESPN doesn't like the ACC, well, maybe they added three teams that really don't help their overall brand or product at a cost to their partner, probably without their partner's consent, let's just say. Okay. The mistake that was made was when they had this alliance 2 years ago and they said, okay, Oklahoma and Texas are leaving. Hey, I'm Jim Phillips. You're in charge of the Big Ten, Kevin Warren, and George Kliakoff. You're in charge of the Pac-12. We all agree anytime somebody moves, another domino is going to fall. Let's make sure another domino doesn't fall. That lasted what? That was December to the next
6 months.
Yeah, it lasted to the next June when USC and UCLA said, hey, cool, awesome. Carol Fall, hey, no, cool, that's great. We're going to the Big Ten. That led the Pac-12's demise. The Pac-12 thought they were worth more than they are. They priced themselves out of a television deal. Their conference falls apart. And what does the Big Ten do? They're the ones who initially say to Washington and Oregon, you can come join us. You're not getting a full ride, though.
But we'll be your port in the storm.
But we'll take care of you. That's where the ACC, in my opinion, our thinking at the time was, well, the ACC is Three Musketeers, all for one, one for all. They don't give half rates to anybody.
Except Notre Dame.
Right? Well, 5/8. Yeah. So the deal should have been, hey, how do we form some sort of our own little 20-team super conference?
It was there for them.
So we're playing games, as they say, all day on these networks and all this other stuff.
It was there for them. There was an opportunity for the ACC to make that particular move and get into where we're headed, the content business, with their own network.
Yeah.
And instead, for whatever reason,
you throw Arizona in there, you throw Utah in there.
It was there for them for the taking.
Yeah.
So you had to do it one of two ways. Either you go and make the big move, which is what we just laid out, or you don't do anything. You don't do anything.
Yep.
Because you have a television contract that keeps you safe
through 2036.
Because as you mentioned, the one thing that I got wrong throughout this entire process, because you can go back and look at our YouTube where I said major conference realignment is dead. And the reason why I felt that conference realignment was dead was because there was no more money left from the television networks.
The old formula. Yeah.
In the old formula. And the Pac-12 was the one that should have taken a safe deal that they could have gotten from their partners like ESPN. Instead, their commissioner said, no, we're going to go into those Silicon Valley office buildings and we're going to sell them on our vision and they're going to give us so much money. And instead, they got a worse cut rate deal than Apple gave MLS.
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, no, we'll give you this money if you reach certain subscriber goals, incentive-laden contracts. And all the presidents wisely said, hell no, because we need guaranteed money. And that I did not. And I think that's ultimately my biggest takeaway in all of this when it comes to conference realignment and college athletics. I don't know how many times I have to learn the lesson. The people in charge are not as competent as you give them the benefit of the doubt. There are a lot of situations that play out that you don't have all the information, or you're getting information and as a president, you have to make a decision. And we had really illuminating conversations with Holden Thorpe, former chancellor at UNC, about this kind of stuff. And he's more than happy to tell you about all the things that played out behind the scenes. And again, we thanked him for all the times he gave us some great insight.
Exit fee, and you can see why now. The exit fee is not a good system because a new conference that wants you can just figure out a way to pay that.
Mm-hmm.
So we really needed everybody to sign over their broadcast rights. And most of us wanted to do it. There were a couple of schools that were a little iffier. And actually, we scheduled one call. Here's a little bit of drama for you. We scheduled one call that we thought we had it. And it turns out there were two holdouts. And of course,
statute of limitations. You could tell us
who are the it's UVA and Florida State.
Okay. Virginia.
Yeah, that was all about the conflict between Terry Sullivan and her board. So I told Swafford we really shouldn't have a call, because if we have a call and two people vote against it, guys like you are going to figure that out, and it could have blown up the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because every time we had a call, as soon as we hung up,
so you saw it.
We saw it on Twitter.
Yeah.
So we canceled the call, and I told Swafford, you need to get on a plane to Tallahassee and Charlottesville, which he did. The UVA thing was straightforward. The board just felt like they weren't being consulted enough, and so he went and romanced the board, and that was all that was needed there. The Florida State one, I think Eric Barron was the president then. He wanted to do the deal, but his board was in a similar place to where Rick McCullough's board is now. But, they didn't really have that many other good options at the time. And I think this is probably still true. Florida didn't want Florida State in the SEC.
Say it louder and clearer so that everyone
Yes.
kind of understands what Florida State's options are. Take all of the ESPN portion of this out of the equation, like Florida, Alabama, Georgia. What incentive would they have to help Florida State? They don't.
Zero.
So going forward, now we're just kind of counting down how this is going to end for the ACC. The one thing the ACC still has going for it, though, Joe, is that television contract. And we talked to Bubba Cunningham twice this year where he laid it out very plainly. There was the time he gave us the J.J. Abrams lens flare in the back of the car, laying it out real simple, what everybody's looking at when it comes to getting out of the ACC.
What I was saying is we know the number to withdraw from the league.
Okay.
That is a defined number.
Okay.
The number that I say is in question is the grant of rights.
Mm-hmm.
So can I buy back the grant of rights? I know the grant of rights says I've granted my rights. They've been sold to ESPN. I could calculate that number and say they own my rights from now until 2036. The payout is going to be $30 million a year. So that's 12 years. That's going to be $360 million. Let's just say that that's the number. My point is we would go to court and argue and say, well, I can't pay that or I shouldn't pay that. ACC say, well, just give us X million to get out. That's why I'm saying that number is not known.
Got it.
That's what I meant by that.
I just want a clarification on that because, somebody might take this conversation, put it on social media and, go crazy with it.
I can't believe that would happen.
Never, not in this environment. And then there was our conversation with him in December with Florida State saber rattling again. Again, Bubba is the most level-headed person in this conversation because he just lays it out. Television contracts are ultimately the thing that are the canary in the coal mine for future conference realignment.
This was a move made in anticipation of a Florida State or Clemson or a Carolina leaving the league. Mm-hmm. As someone who's involved in these conversations, you're in the room where it happens. Like, do you get the sense that that's imminent?
Well, I think that what we've heard and what we've seen action on is, there's a financial gap between the television contracts between the SEC and the Big Ten and the ACC. So to try to close that gap, we've created this success initiative that allows some of the schools that are going to compete at the highest level, particularly in football, to help close the gap. So I think that was a step toward it. And I think that's very helpful in that scenario. But I think all of us are a bit uneasy because none of us thought 12 months ago we wouldn't have a Pac-12. And so when you see that, then you're like, oh my gosh, if it can happen to them, it can happen to anybody. So I understand the concern about it, but I don't anticipate it. And if you look back the last couple of years, all of those transitions have been tied to the expiration of their media rights. And so to me, those are the tipping point dates that we need to keep in mind, that's when things would change, probably not until those times.
So going forward, we're just going to have to sit and listen to the spin of the ACC until about 2030. We're going to have more Jim Phillips press conferences like we did in October at ACC Tip-Off, where they're trying to somehow gaslight us into, oh, this is great, and we're bringing these great institutions with all these championships in sports not named football. And the question that you and I have to ask ourselves, do we want to continue to be antagonistic at these press conferences or not? So yesterday, during the Jim Phillips Forum, I had a question to ask. They hand you the mic, and I basically did it like this.
Second row, Joe.
Good morning, Jim.
Hi, Joe.
From Raleigh.
Joe from Raleigh.
I'm just Joe from Raleigh. I'll hang up and listen. And then meanwhile, you get the mic at the end of the press conference. You got your eating grin on, and this is how it went.
Last question.
Joe Giglio, Ovius and Giglio. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Joe.
I was proactive about trying to put together a new slogan. You know, we always say, hey, 5 stars only, positive vibes only. Okay. So I feel like we should probably go in a new direction where, you know, we want to say, when it comes to the podcast, we want our listeners to
protect the fortress.
Protect the fortress.
Got to do the hand motion.
You got to do that. So I'm workshopping this new slogan. Hey, guys.
Protect the fortress.
Give us 5 stars. Positive
vibes
only.
Perfect.
Nailed it. Let's go.
Well, of course we do. You're just trying to get an honest answer out of people. I would say to you, though, if FBS Plus becomes a thing,
yeah,
I could see ESPN saying to the ACC, particularly after I think the additions of Stanford, Cal, and SMU are more contentious behind the scenes than we're talking about.
Oh, I agree.
Like, I think ESPN was like, really?
No.
And the ACC was like, well, it's in the Fish Baits was like, well, it's in the contract. And I think ESPN was like, this is what you want to do. This is, like I said to Roy Cooper, this is the violence you want to choose.
I can tell you, based on my conversations with people in the industry, that there's a lot of, okay, if this is what you want, but keep in mind, we have a long memory.
Yeah.
Those types of things. And that's why that's why, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, keep an eye on how ESPN puts their arms completely around the SEC.
And that's where I think you could see the change.
Mm-hmm.
If the FBS Plus becomes a thing, I could see ESPN buying out and dissolving the ACC, because quite frankly, there will be schools in the ACC that choose not to compete at the highest level. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
No, nothing wrong with that.
And then ESPN, rather than letting Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina and Miami in particular go to the Big Ten, I believe they will tell those schools, here, we have a nice safe harbor for you over here in our new SEC Atlantic division. I think that's more likely to happen than we get to 2030 and you start seeing teams splinter off. I think ESPN will be the driver in the end of the ACC. Give them the fastball, the old number one.
Carolina Hurricanes had a hell of a 2023. We spent a lot of time. I think the reason why I wanted to put the Canes at number one, you notice that everything was pretty contentious with a lot of our conversations. There was like some real like meat on the bone, angst coming out with a lot of these conversations. But now with the Carolina Hurricanes, yes, people were bummed out. They were bummed out that the Carolina Hurricanes got knocked out in the playoffs, and it just happened to be the hot goalie situation. Remember, one of our earlier shows, we talked to the governor, Roy Cooper, Canes fan number one, and I set it up with him. I wanted to have this conversation when we were getting ready for the Stanley Cup final. But the Bob had different ideas for the Carolina Hurricanes. And just look at the pain on Roy Cooper's face when we brought it up.
I have to ask you. I wanted to talk to you while the Canes were in the Stanley Cup final, but unfortunately, that was always the plan. I'm like, when they get there, we're going to talk to Roy Cooper. Unfortunately, that did not happen. Are you doing some kind of? Are you doing some self-medication, some self-preservation by not watching this finals and seeing how Bobrovsky suddenly can get scored on?
So I watch a little bit of it, and Bobrovsky's leaking like a sieve, and it's just scoring more goals in one game than we did the entire series. It's just ridiculous. And it just shows you how mental sports is and how much momentum affects the game itself. And, you know, we're just caught in a squeeze. I don't think Vegas is that much better than we are. I just think that the Panthers at some point were having to come down from where they were. They had an amazing run.
But other than that disappointment, Joe, I would say that the Canes are it's like a distilled joy of sports. Why we like sports and why the Triangle is a great place to be, because when we have an event, baby,
we love it.
We get behind the event. From the Stadium Series, where you want to tell the Gary Bettman story again?
Oh God.
And from the Stadium Series,
that.
It was back in February. It was a long time ago. But you want to tell the Gary Bettman parking story?
Getting into the stadium was such a disaster.
It was some of our best radio, though.
And he's at the elevator. And what did I say to him? Like, hey, man, next time I really hope you ask the people who are here how to help you put this event on. Because
the parking was a disaster.
The traffic was bad.
Yeah.
The parking was bad. And then the getting into the stadium was like.
And then they just started letting people in.
Yeah.
Ethan had some incredible photos of the end zone gate, the Gale Plaza area, and how it was wrapped around PNC. And we're like 20 minutes from face-off.
Yeah, Gary had a shit-eating grin on his face. He was so happy with himself and all this other stuff. And I think he is from New Jersey. And I went full effing Jersey mode on him. And he looked, and we were like in the elevator together.
He respects that.
And he's looking at me like, who is this clown? And how did he get a credential?
Those
were great moments.
I have done enough interviews with Gary Bettman to know he respected that.
Yeah.
Because the jersey coming out is how he likes to spar. He really likes to spar. So I don't think he minded that. But we talked to Tom Dundon from the this was it in the gas station? No, this was Tom Dundon in the summertime when things had wrapped up and we were talking about free agency. We talked about the Stadium Series, which was this incredible event, and when we were going to get another one, because he wants to do another one, and he had this to say.
Is if we get the renovations and all that done, and that's a pretty big commitment from the city and the state and the county, that as part of that long-term lease, we'd like to have some things agreed to from the NHL. But that's, I think we have to go first on our side. Here's what the new vision is. And then I bet we have a better chance of getting some of those dates locked in. We're not going for drafts and all-star games. We're going to I think we talked about this last time. We're going to just focus on outdoor game. I think outdoor game fits our market.
No interest in the all-star game? Because that was a pretty fun event when it was here.
I'd rather do something, focus on something, do it really well, and know it's going to be great than, I don't know, the all-star game. It's not really really something for me.
So this kicked off, the Stadium Series and the playoffs and all the talk around the Hurricanes led to what I think is probably the most impactful thing in the area since the Carolina Hurricanes won the Stanley Cup in 2006. We get that new stadium lease. We get the renovation plans and everything going forward. And it finally puts to rest the relocation rumors because of this sweet, sweet deal that they've got around PNC Arena and the development around it, to the point where we joke with General Manager President Don Waddell, you have to come up with some new things to answer from the Canadian media.
Yeah, we were talking about that this morning. Every time Montreal comes to town, they always have that one guy that asks when we're going to be moving there. So that is off the table, which it was never on the table, by the way, because that's not the place I would pick anyways. But nothing against Quebec, but no, we're all good here.
But of course, Joe, this is a long process when it comes to what that area is going to look like. And just got to buckle up and get ready for some, budget changes and everything else.
Yeah, I love that off the ice you've seen now the future. When you went to Detroit, and you saw Little Caesars Arena.
Yes.
You saw the gambling aspect. You saw just how easy it was and how different the experience is. I mean, it really is. So, that's the off the ice stuff. And I think you've seen the commitment from Tom Dundon. They're a cap team. They're spending. They make the moves. I think they've done well in the construction of their roster, keeping the players together, taking some swings where they can. I think it's funny you mentioned it. They're the team that kind of galvanizes. I took some notes on opening night because sometimes you got to take notes.
Oh, sure.
And this is what I wrote. I have smoke and lights because I remember they introduced everybody on the team and everybody in the franchise. And I said, it is the hope that kills you, but goddamn if it ain't exhilarating while you're in the thick of it. And that's where you are on opening night. And you have that dream. You have that hope. That's where you are at the Stadium Series. When you are outside, you finally get out there. And they have those uniforms on and they're scoring these goals and they're schooling the Capitals. And you're like, man,
the Canes,
let me breathe a little bit. Let me have this. Let me live these moments.
The Canes are unique in this area because we're so trained to be at each other's throats for the three schools in the area. And even with a lot of people who move here, they still have their NFL team. The Panthers are something that when they're running hot, people will get behind. But ultimately, people don't love the Panthers. People love the Canes.
They do.
People straight up love the Canes. And it's why in the Stadium Series, we had Carolina fans that were upset. Canes fans that are Carolina fans who are like, but wait a minute, why is NC State getting this free publicity? Well, I mean, it's at their stadium, y'all. They're neighbors. They share a building, for heaven's sake.
Yeah. So that's the off the ice stuff. On the ice, now you got 3 division titles in a row. I know the point system has changed, but the last 2 years have been their 2 highest point totals in franchise history. They had 116 and 22, 113 last year. One of the things that we've learned from Tom Dundon is their odds.
Yes.
You know, from the beer cave, like
as he told us in the beer cave,
how we calculate the odds. Well, it's easy to overlook from last year that because Boston had set an NHL record for wins and points. The Canes weren't that far off from Boston, who had a record season. You know, so they get to the playoffs. They beat the Islanders. Remember, a little bit of touch and go there.
It was
right. 6 games. They get rid of the Devils in 5. Here comes Florida. Florida with Paul Maurice. Florida who eked into the playoffs. Game 1 goes to 4 overtimes, and of course, the Bob happened. But they lose 3-2. They end up losing the next 3 games by a total of 3 goals. They lost the series. They lost 4 total games by a total of 4 goals. And as Tom Dundon told us, like under our calculations, like the chances of that happening in that series were like 0.004.
So I wanted to focus on Dundon for a little bit longer too, because it does tie back into when we talked about the Carolina Panthers, and you as an organization take on whatever the personality is of your owner, and how do you go about your business? What are you about? And we can't sugarcoat Tom Dundon at this point. When Dundon took over, there was some push and pull. There were some instances where people were not happy with Dundon.
He made decisions based on that spreadsheet, man. He's loyal to it.
And he's loyal to the spreadsheet, not loyal to people. So you can bring up things like John Forsland. You can bring up a lot of people. Chuck Caton. You can bring up people that you are not front facing, that have been working with the organization for a long time, that left because they're just looking at Dundon's looking at the value proposition and going, why am I doing this? And he ruffled a lot of feathers. And that's not something that you can really, it's hard to thread the needle on ruffling the feathers, advancing and modernizing an organization, and then bringing people back to the fold. Because the one thing that Dundon is absolutely right about is all this ancillary stuff, people will get over if you win.
Right.
If you win.
Right.
And this gets.
And how about the most important thing he's ever said to us? We ask him in the beer cave.
You're also kind of hands-on. What's your philosophy with that?
I want to make sure that whatever you think is right, we've thought through all the other choices. No different than where should we put a baseball team. I think I know, but I can't be sure until we do the work. I am knowledgeable enough to come up with a reason to do it another way.
Okay.
But hopefully I'm not so prideful that I would think just because I came up with another option, that's what you should do. Right. Okay. And so our group's really good at everybody talking about it and going through it and getting to a decision, and mostly because we have a coach who doesn't need to be right either, right? But if you're asking a hockey question, you can ask me or him.
I'm gonna ask Rod.
Me too.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't mean I'm not gonna argue with Rod about it.
So that's where Tom Dundon gets it right. He also answers questions. Like, we've given him a hard time about parking decks. We've given him a hard time about beer prices. We've given him a hard time about some of his announcer choices.
He's always told us too. He's always said, look,
about the TV deal. And,
like,
hey, man, I want money. And he's going, I'll give you money.
Yeah. And Dundon has straight up said, hey, you can be like that if what you're basing it off of is based in truth. Like, if you're not just making stuff out of nothing. And he always has an answer. Like, when I give him grief about the beer, he goes, you want to see how we were losing money on the beer? Or when I hit him like, yeah, but that's 2 beers I would have bought. He goes, yeah, now you can drive home safe. Like, you're good. You're good on these things. I see you. You're good on those,
definitely,
Tom.
And he's buddies with Tepper. Tepper could really go to the Dundon school of PR.
And I mean, the same thing too with Tom and like, again, disrupting the area, dragging it to a modern era. And that even comes down to his big visions for things like Major League Baseball. I can sit here and scoff of the idea because of the infrastructure issues that we've talked about a lot, but man, I give him a lot of credit for at least looking into the possibility of making it work, because that's ultimately what this area needs.
Raleigh is in a position, if we do it right, to have a real chance at this. Okay. It takes a lot of people and a lot of work. I think we can put ourselves in a position that makes it very attractive to choose Carolina.
And we're talking North Carolina. You say Carolina.
I believe the right way to do this is to go through a process to give us the best chance in Carolina.
Gotcha.
That might be in Raleigh. It might be in Charlotte. I don't know. But I don't think, I think the role is we all work together with fans, sponsors, corporates, the government, and find out how we put our best foot forward. And whatever that is what I think we should do.
Okay.
And the less anyone has any biases, and the more we just go for the best package.
Okay.
And I don't know what that is, so it's hard for me to say. I just know I know the only thing I'm interested in is it being in Carolina, and I prefer it to be in Raleigh because that's where we are. But I wouldn't do anything that wasn't in the best interest of giving us the best chance.
Is there a Tepper in the background?
I like Dave, but I mean, I think my guess is if we're doing something, Dave would try to help. I don't think this is a thing for him. But
so as we wrap up this year in review part 2, and the focus being on the things that we spent the most amount of time talking about, we can close on the Canes also being a provider of amazing content, because with the Canes, we have Sebastian Aho beating you in Mulkey.
I still can't believe that the pin didn't go over when I had the walk-off ready to go.
We have Seth Jarvis. Hole in one on you.
At least he beat me. Like that was his putt. Like he made that thing. I am actually over with that one. I've squared that one. I have not squared the Mulkey.
Yeah.
And then when I saw Aho, the next time I saw Aho, I go, "Did you watch the replay of that?" He was like, "No." And I was like, "There's no way that thing shouldn't have knocked over." He's like, "But it didn't, and I still won." I was like, "Yeah, you did."
That's where
Can't spot the lie.
That's where the competitive comes out.
Yes.
And then after that, Mulkey, Aho's like, "Man, I can't live next to that guy." So we moved. He's no longer my neighbor.
Did the house get already sold?
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah.
Gotcha.
I never went on the market. Yeah, you know how this area is, man. It's nuts. So that is our year in review. Thanks to everybody who has consumed our content in one form or the other, whether it's in podcast, YouTube, social media, people who've shown up to our events. We greatly appreciate it.
Supporting our sponsors the way that you have. That's been the biggest. That's been the biggest, I'm going to say, surprise to me about all of this adventure since May, in that I knew we had an audience. I knew we had people that would listen. But even again, I told you we get this text from Matt Davis over at State Farm, and it's like, "Hey, I just want you to know, we just had 2 people who said specifically, we listened to the show, we lost our homeowners policy, and we called you, we got it worked out, we saved money." The any number of people who go to the pizza plate, go to Oakwood Pizza Box and go, "Yeah, you're not kidding. This is really, really good pizza." Same thing for Wings Over. Like, these wings are amazing. Butcher's Market, the sandwiches at the Butcher's Market. So and it's not just that you've enjoyed them, it's that you've shared with other people on social media in the way that you have. And that has truly, warms the cold black heart sometimes, Joe, where you think, man, this world really sucks. And then all of a sudden you get some people who do kind things, right? And they don't have to do that.
No, they don't.
They don't have to go out of their way. And it's not just one person.
No, yeah.
That's the part of it where I would say, for real, thank you, because you're making us work, and that's good.
That's going to wrap it up for 2023. We will see you January 2nd, 2024, to recap all of the bowl stuff. Who played? I almost feel like I can hit you with the trivia question. Did this person play or not play? Is it even a real football player?
Tell me, future boy.
What did you see in the bowl games? Happy New Year. See you in 2024.